lanced. And I was more interested in being on the other side, in exposing, the real motivations of these witnesses. But there's the one thing I never judged too harshly, even the Bush administration, which I frankly was not a fan of, and I thought that they overstepped in many directions. But I always remembered the way I felt as a prosecutor, and it's one thing, it's one thing to be on the sidelines talking about what ought to be done in the name of the community and public safety, and it's quite another to shoulder that responsibility. And that's the hard part of being a prosecutor. If you're lucky enough to have the kind of job I had, and most prosecutors have, if you're trying somebody whom you think is really bad news, who's done bad things to the community. And it's a terrible thing morally, and often in terms of public safety, for that person to go free. So that's the burden of being a prosecutor.
Is there such a thing as unconditional evil? Have you met it? Have you come across it?
Well, that's really an interesting question, which I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I was involved in a case in which two men were convicted of a murder and sentenced to death, which neither one of them had committed. And sometime the following year, there was another murder of another little girl. And when they apprehended the guy who'd done that crime, he admitted that he, in fact, was guilty of the murder that my clients had committed. And even though the prosecutors didn't want to believe it, he persisted in saying that because he was unwilling to see two men die for a crime he knew he had committed. Now, on the other hand, he had killed two little girls, kidnapped a third, killed a nurse, raped three women, committed an incredible array of burglaries, and had reached the point in his life where he could look you in the eye and say, if you let me out of here, I'll do it again.
It's Henry Brisbane?
No, this is not Henry.
Okay, it's another guy.
Henry really is. I was going to draw a distinction between this man, Brian Dugan, and Henry Brisbane, who was a prisoner in the the Supermax facility in Illinois. And and Henry is nothing more than a killing machine. If Hannibal Lecter really exists, then Henry Brisbane is who we're thinking about. He's somebody who takes pleasure out of killing. And yet, Henry's he's a very clever guy. He's a very engaging person to speak to. Shrewd, incredibly manipulative. But yeah, Henry's pretty close to pure evil. You would not want to be his roommate.
You were in favor of the death penalty.
At one point, yeah.
At one point, and then you were on the commission
right.
of studying the death penalty after there had been proven a lot of
right.
capital cases were bungled or whatever, and you changed.
Right.
What changed you? Was it the idea that an innocent person could die, or was it the idea that the thing is in and of itself wrong?
It in some ways was neither of those considerations. The idea that it's in and of itself wrong is a powerful statement of values, but it is not a statement of values that everybody shares. So I never thought you could win the argument that way. Because in point of fact, in a democracy, you're imposing your values on somebody else. The fact that innocent people were getting convicted of heinous murders was a revelation to me that I had never believed possible while I was a federal prosecutor. And of course, I realized that not all cases were prosecuted in quite the high-minded way that cases were prosecuted by the office in which I served. But the big revelation to me was that I, like most people who think about the death penalty, always would take the extreme cases, for example, Gacy,
Wayne,
who was murdered 33 young men in the cruelest possible way, and you go, well, that son of a bitch doesn't deserve to die. There isn't anybody who deserves to die, and I think he deserves to die. So there were right cases for capital punishment in terms of my own outrage meter. And that's the way most people think about capital punishment. Is there a case that's so extreme, like if they captured Hitler or Osama bin Laden, does he deserve to die? That is not the right way to think about it. The question is to approach it in a real-world way, and especially to approach it as a lawyer and recognize that you need to construct a legal system that will reach those right cases. And the question is then, can you construct a system that will reach the right cases without also reaching the wrong cases? And the wrong cases, of course, are the cases of the innocent. And even more troubling, the cases of, and they're almost all young men, so I'll say young men, whose case by any sense of relative moral gravity is just not as severe as other people who have not been sentenced to death. And I just realized that the law was never going to be able to sift that fine with a punishment so horrible.
Just before we go to questions from the audience, have to ask if Rusty's coming back again. And will he be on the Supreme Court of the United States?
Well, I think Rusty's judicial career is indubitably over. There's no way to rescue this without violating the rules of my own universe. I'm unwilling now, perhaps because I've learned from the many years that I vowed that I would never write another Rusty Savage novel. I am unwilling now to say that it's not going to happen, but I don't think it'll be my next book.
But never say never.
But I'm not going to say never. And frankly, if I had to guess, I haven't said this out loud yet, so, Michael Enright gets kudos as interlocutor. But if I had to guess, I think there's one more Savage novel.
That's terrific. Scott Turow, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.